IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is now Tuesday, January 28th. We are one day closer into the postseason, and there's a lot of content coming out our way, man. I mean, it's still weird. I mean, it's depending on the day, it feels like the national championship game was yesterday. Also, depending on the day, it feels like it was a month ago with how fast news breaks, right? And so mine and Brian's plates are really, really full. We're cranking out as much content as possible to talk through all of the different potential moves that this team is going to be making in the offseason, right? But we have go ahead. You're muted.
It is kind of funny, Trev, because, I sit here and I come up with the offseason schedule and I'm like, there's no way we're going to have enough content to fill the entire offseason. And every time we get to fall camp and you're like, man, we didn't get to everything I wanted to get to this year. Like, that's just kind of how it always goes, man. But I'm trying to be positive today, Trev. I'm turning over a new positive leaf. And that positive, I'm just kidding. I think I'm a pretty positive person. But that is, we're one day closer to the 2025 season. That's what I'm going to keep telling myself. We're one day closer to 2025. And I think that's a pretty pertinent attitude to have when you consider what we're going to be talking about today.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I mean, so what we got on schedule for today for everybody is, I'm sure most of you saw it. It's out on the boards. Notre Dame released it, but their 2025 football schedule is out. And so we're going to kick off the show today, and we're going to talk through what that schedule is, who the opponents are on there, what our initial takeaways are, different stretches of the schedule. And we're going to just give it a quick little overview of what Notre Dame has on the docket for 2025. After that, we're going to talk through building on the 2024 success, right? They went 14-2. They made a national championship appearance. At one point in time, they were 3rd and 11 stop away from potentially going down and tying the game, right? So something that keeps me awake, but we're going to talk about if this football team can build on the success on 2024 into 2025. Then we're going to start laying some groundwork for some of the expectations in 2025, right? We're going to talk through what those are, the reasons why we're optimistic, and then some of the biggest questions that we have, right? Because Notre Dame still doesn't have a defensive coordinator. We don't know what some of the things are going to look like, right?
We don't know who the starting quarterback is going to
be. Right. So there's a lot of different questions and things that will just sort themselves out naturally. As much as I wish I had a say, and as much as Brian wished that he had a say in what happens and what the turnout is going to be for the 2025 season, we're kind of just sitting and waiting with the rest of you guys, but we'll make sure that we provide as much information as we can when we get it. And then, of course, at the end of the show today, like Brian talked about yesterday, we're going to do an hour-long mailbag. So all throughout the show, if you guys want to submit some mailbag questions, anything that pops into your mind, we'll be covering those at the end of the show today.
Yeah, I'm excited, man, because it is our we're in that weird period where I'm not ready to completely close the book on 2024 because there's still a lot of lessons to be learned from it. And I'm not quite ready to fully dive into 2025. And I feel like this show is going to be a really nice transition. We'll start off with a little bit of news talking about the schedule. That wasn't originally on the docket, but it did get finalized last night. According to Matt Fortuna, the schedule is finalized. And it's kind of like, okay, now we know the schedule, right? Now you know what's in front of you. And let's kind of start transitioning there, but while also taking a little bit of a look back at 2024 to say, hey, what lessons can still be learned from this season? And that's what we'll discuss today, Trev, because we'll get into it here in a minute, but it's I feel like every year there's been some playoff team that has a drop off. It's, you know what I mean? It seems like it's almost every year. I mean, you look at Cincinnati goes from, the two great years they had to 9-3 to Fickle's gone to their, a wreck now. You look at TCU has their magical season in 2022 and then they fall off. 2023 Michigan wins a national title. The next year, they need a couple late season wins just to get into a bowl game. And they ended up finishing strong, going 8-5. But there was a period of time there, if they don't win, sort of 3 of their last 4 games, who knows what their season looks like. And we've seen it before in past seasons. Obviously, LSU wins a title in 19. They have a big fall off in 2020. We have seen this plenty of times where at least one team in a lot of years that was the title team the year before or a playoff team the year before has that big drop-off. And so what we're going to ask is Notre Dame that team, or is Notre Dame in position to build on that success and really take it to the next level? But obviously, Trevor, one part of that is going to be the schedule. And we're going to kick things off today with that.
So, Bryan, let's jump in here, feet first, man, and talk through what the 2025 schedule is. As you said, Matt Fortuna released it, said that Notre Dame has finalized their 2025 schedule for the season. So, some of what that goes into, right, of what the success is going to look like for Notre Dame in 2025 is who you're going to play, right? And what's that going to look like for them? So, what they have and what they've released is they start out the season like we knew at Miami. They did move the date to Sunday. That was finalized before the actual official schedule was released. But they play Miami in Miami to kick off the season on August 31st, which is Labor Day Sunday. Following that up, they do have a bye week, early bye. And then after that, they host Texas A&M at home. And then they rattle off, I believe, 6 straight. They play Texas A&M at home, Purdue at home. They play at Arkansas. They host Boise State. They host NC State. And then they host USC. And then they have their second bye week of the season. After that, the home stretch, they're at Boston College. They host Navy at home. And then they're at Pitt. They're back home again for Syracuse for Senior Day. And then, like tradition has shown us, they will finish their season out west, this time against Stanford at Stanford. Now, there were some rumblings about them potentially playing in the Rose Bowl for this being the 100th year anniversary of the Notre Dame-Stanford Rose Bowl game from 1925. But as of right now, to my knowledge, this game is set inside of Stanford Stadium. So
yeah, so that it could still end up being there. I would imagine there's some logistical things that need to get worked out. The time of the day of the game is what mattered. It's going to be the end of the season. Now, I don't believe we'll find out, I guess, from Notre Dame, but I don't believe this is a formal extension of the Notre Dame Stanford rivalry, which ended in 2024. It ended this season. It's more of just the next year they're going to play. ACC released the schedule. So the reason their schedule got finalized is because the ACC released their schedule, because Notre Dame had 11 games scheduled, but they had like 5 TBDs on there, right? We don't know when they're going to play certain ACC teams. And so that got released yesterday, and that showed that Notre Dame was going to play Stanford. And in that release, they said that they would play inside Stanford Stadium. That would make me believe that that's kind of where it is, but for now, but they can always change that if Stanford and Notre Dame agree to do that. That's between those two schools. All the ACC needed to do was say who's playing who and when, and then the schools can decide the where down the road.
right.
So that if there is going to be sort of that Rose Bowl type of game, which I think would be flipping awesome, by the way.
Yeah.
But if that happens, that can always be decided down the road. But the release from the ACC, the official release from the ACC, did in fact say that it would be played at Stanford Stadium.
I also just went and took a look at UCLA's schedule, and they finished the season at USC inside of the Coliseum. So as of right now, there is no game scheduled inside of the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, because I think,
29th.
yeah, right, exactly, because UCLA plays at USC that weekend, so that would be interesting. And that would also make it very intriguing because you'd have 2 major bowl games in California, in LA, the LA area, because obviously it's Pasadena, but that's right outside of LA. And for me, that'd be kind of cool because that's where the Broncos played their first Super Bowl that I was basically alive for. I don't know that I was alive for the Cowboys Super Bowl in 77 or 78. I forget if I was alive. I was an infant. But I still remember that Pasadena Super Bowl, and I remember Denver having a lead going into that. And that's been kind of cool, some of the experience I've had, Trevor, just a little bit off topic. But like Notre Dame played Navy in 2018 in San Diego. It was basically at the old not Jack Murphy, but I think they used to call it Jack Murphy. But that's where Denver beat the Packers in the 97 Super Bowl. So like I was there the day before the game to get my credentials, and the stadium was just open. I just walked in, and I'm standing there, and I'm literally like envisioning in my head, like, okay, this is where all this happened. I'm envisioning like Howard Cross reaching behind with that one-handed catch. And I'm envisioning Terrell Davis going into the end zone. I'm saying, okay, that's where Elway did the helicopter. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm like, this is so freaking cool.
That's so cool.
And so doing it in Pasadena, that's like first time I was at the Coliseum, the LA Coliseum, to watch Notre Dame play USC. I think that was 2014. I think it was my first trip there. And I'm sitting there, I'm like down on the field after the game. I'm thinking like, this is where Super Bowl I got played. They've had Olympics here. You know what I mean? Like, think of all the legends that have played in the stadium in the NFL. Because remember, the Raiders used to play there. And so it's been kind of cool to have some of those experiences. You know, playing catch. One of the Notre Dame student managers had bought gloves and a ball when they played at Fenway, and I was like, bro, you gotta let me, you know what I mean? You gotta give
Let
me
you
that
spin
mitt.
it.
You gotta give me that mitt, buddy.
Yeah.
And so I played catch in left field. You know, thinking about all the people, you know, at Fenway. So it's been a cool deal. But
Awesome.
I would like to see that game be played in the Rose Bowl. I think that'd be pretty cool. And it's not like Stanford's going to have a whole lot of fans of their own fans there. So, but that'll be interesting. But as of right now, it is listed in Stanford Stadium. So, but looking at the schedule, Trev, we'll give some sort of overviews on kind of how these things are, you know, how these things are going to go, and dive into that a little bit. But first and foremost, just a couple particulars about the schedule as Trevor went through it. There's 10 Power 4 teams on the schedule. The only two non-Power 4 teams on the schedule are a team in Boise State that went 12-2 and a team in Navy that went 10-3 this past season. And that's a challenging schedule. It's like everybody that does should never play MAC teams. Well, you know, that's a brutal schedule. I mean, your weakest games are going to be Power 4 teams this season. And not brutal because there's it's a murderer's row, but like there's not a ton. You're going to hope that your off weeks are against like Purdue and NC State and Pitt, or you know what I mean? Like there's not a lot of those type of games. I don't know how I feel about that, but overall the schedule, you look at the opponent record, Trev, 88-67. It's a quality schedule. 10 of the 12 teams in the schedule earned a bowl game last year. You had 4 teams last season that won 10 or more games. Miami went 10-3. Boise State went 12-2. Navy went 10-3, and Syracuse went 10-3. So you know there's that as well. It's a challenging schedule. Arkansas obviously is you get another SEC team, second year in a row that Notre Dame's going to be going on the road playing an SEC team. Also second in year that Notre Dame's going to play 2 SEC teams this year. They needed it. They played, you know, obviously A&M on the schedule, but then they played Georgia in the playoff. This year in 2025, you're actually going to have a pair of SEC teams in the regular season. So Notre Dame will play obviously ACC teams. They're going to have a Big Ten team on their schedule. They're going to have 2 SEC. They're going to have 2 Big Ten teams on their schedule. I still can't get used to USC being in the Big Ten.
I know.
They're going to play 2 SEC teams, and then obviously you're going to have a Mountain West team and a team from the American Athletic Conference. So that's sort of the particulars of the schedule. The only team on the schedule, every year it seems lately there's been a team on the schedule they've never played before, and that's going to be Boise State. That's the team on the schedule they've never played before. I believe Notre Dame. Actually, I don't know that Notre Dame and Arkansas have ever played each other either. Let me look at that real quick. Yeah, they've never played each other either. So there's 2 teams on the schedule that Notre Dame has never played before. Now, they came close to playing Boise this year. If Boise can win one more game, Notre Dame plays Boise in the semifinals. But neither those two, that'll be interesting. I always enjoy those games where it's the first time that Notre Dame and a team have ever played. I know Andrew McDonough hates those weeks because there's no serious history for him to write for the site. But I always enjoy those. I always like when there's a team or couple teams on the schedule that they've never played before. So that's the particulars of it. Just let's dive into some overall thoughts, Trev. First and foremost, what was your first initial reaction when you saw? Because like we kind of knew what the schedule was going to look like. There's been rumors that Stanford was going to be the 12th team for a while. The only question was how would the schedule get put together? And a lot of times it's how that's put together is even more important than who you play. You know, it's like the 2023 schedule wasn't necessarily hard, abnormally hard from the standpoint of who they played, but the order in which games were played with no bye forever and just back to back to back to back, and then the night games. So that was what we were waiting on, was really that. So now that it's there, Trev, what are some of your thoughts on that game?
Yeah, when I first dove into this schedule, the thing, first and foremost, that was glaring was the early bye week, which I don't love. I don't love them playing a game on the road and then having an entire week off and then jumping into 6 straight games when the first part of your schedule is arguably the more tumultuous in comparison to the second half. Right. I mean, you look at the first 6 games that they play after the bye week, their first bye week, they're at home against an SEC team. Yes, they're at home against Purdue, but I got to believe that Purdue is going to be better than what they were this past year. Like I said before in a previous show, if Purdue started last in all of 2024, if they started their season with a 34-0 head start, they would finish 6-6. So I find it really, really hard to believe that they're going to be the same or worse. So you host a Big Ten team. Then the week after that, you travel back into SEC country. You play Arkansas. Then you're at home against Boise State. So you have back-to-back opponents that you've never faced before as a program. Then you're at home against NC State. They went 6-7, played in a bowl game this past year. Then you obviously have rivalry weekend where you have USC at home before your next bye week. And so for me, I don't love the early bye week for a handful of reasons. It makes the team kind of hard to get into a little bit of a rhythm. It throws different things off, especially when you're traveling week one. It puts you into a different funk before you do have your home opener. So there's a lot of different factors in there for me. So, it was interesting seeing the bye week. I do love the diversity, though, of their schedule, right? I love that they played 2 SEC teams, 2 Big Ten teams. Obviously, they have that little contract with the ACC where they play 6 of their opponents. They obviously still play Navy, and then they play a Mountain West team in Boise State. I like that this schedule is an upgrade from where it was at this past season, right? But again, if last season taught us anything, you never know what these teams are going to end up being, right? I mean, you don't know in the back half of your schedule. They're at Boston College, Navy, at Pitt, home against Syracuse, and at Stanford.
Yeah.
You never know what that brings, but I would be shocked if they did like an Army, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at initially with their schedule, Brian.
I love that point you make, Trev, because like if we would have said like last year, like their last 5 games, they're going to play 2 really good teams in their last 5 games of the year. We would have assumed it was going to be Florida State and USC, not Army and Navy. You know what I mean? And then USC was a 6-6 team, and Florida State was one of the worst teams at the Power 4 level, if not the worst team at the Power 4 level. They were so bad last year. But so to your point, like we look at them like, bam, Boise State, they went 12-2. Well, how good is Boise going to be without Ashton Genty? We're going to find that out. They may still be just as good. They may be more diverse. They may do things differently. We don't know the answer to that. We look at it and say, well, USC, how good are they going to be? We never know how good USC is going to be. Miami's got some key losses. So I kind of had a thought of it. Like, I like the fact that there's some top teams on it, so you need some resume builders. At Miami is going to, I think, be a resume builder. I'll have a lot more to say about Miami in the offseason as we kind of get deeper into it and as we find out who all the teams are. I mean, there's still portal pickups that teams are going to make. There's still guys that teams are going to lose, because of just how slimy the business is. What was the kid that transferred last year to Louisville, the running back, and then all of a sudden just kind of up and bails and he ends up at UCF? I mean, Tyler Barron goes to Louisville and then all of a sudden bails and goes to, I think, Miami, right? Did he go to Ole Miss? I think Miami. But you have a lot of that. So there's still a lot of that's going to get shaken out. But you expect Miami to still be good. And the last time Notre Dame played down there, they got their booties kicked by Miami. Now, they have since kind of exercised those demons in that stadium a little bit with the win over Penn State in that stadium. But it is kind of interesting, too, that 2 of their 3 games are going to be in Miami at that stadium. But looking at it, I'm normally against the early bye, Trev. I really am. And I don't love it even this year. But they made it work to a degree. And the reason I say that is because they have that Sunday game. I don't love the idea of a really quick turnaround playing anybody. I mean, if we learned anything last year, there is no gimme in week 2. You know what I mean? Like, there's no gimme in week 2. And so, you get that Miami game. You can build all your offseason, your whole fall camp can be geared towards that Miami game. And if you go on the road and lose, you've got a week to kind of lick your wounds and overcome it, get past it. That would actually concern me more if they lose the game than if they win it. Because I feel like if you lose it now, you got to sit in that funk for like 2 weeks before you get a chance to exercise those demons. If you win the game, then it's like, okay, we can recalibrate, regroup. You don't have to worry about a short week against anybody that week. Get back on track and then get ready for A&M. The thing about it is, two things about it. Number one is I like the fact that there is a 6-game stretch in there that's going to be kind of tough, but there's only one road game in that stretch of 6 games, which I find interesting. So even though it's a tough 6-game stretch, there's only one trip that you're going to have to make. Then you get a bye, and then you play 5 games. And the thing I like about the makeup of the schedule is no back-to-back road games. That's important for me. You actually, you have your first road game, and then you don't have another road game for 4 weeks, and then you don't have another road game after that for 4 weeks, and then you're on the road 3 of your last 5 weeks. But one of those trips is to Boston, and one of those trips is to Pittsburgh. So Notre Dame's not actually doing as much of the crazy travel in November that we've seen in the past, where in the past we'd see them go to Boston 1 week and then go out to LA the very next week. Or this past year, they go to New York 1 week, and then the very next week they're out in LA. 2015, they played in Boston in game 11, and then the very next week they're flying out after Thanksgiving to California to play Stanford. They don't have that this year. The game before Thanksgiving is going to be at home. So you're going to have senior day at home. The game before that's going to be Pittsburgh. That's about as easy of a road trip as you can make. As far as like not Pitt being easy, but as far as the travel, it's not a very far road trip. It's a very quick flight. You're home much earlier than you're normally home after games, especially if it's a day game, which Notre Dame in November, if they're as good as we think they're going to be, it doesn't really matter who they're playing. It'll probably be a night game.
Right.
If that even adds to it, is because now you don't have that crazy long trip back home. And then the game at Boston is, it's after a bye week. It'll be a week of rest and recovery. The only thing you don't love is that Navy game right in between those. But I never love where Navy's placed, honestly. I always like having the bye after playing Navy, but obviously that wasn't going to happen this year based on the way the schedule's put together. So those are some observations I made, Trev, is like we're on the same page. I don't like the week 2 bye. I like that once you get playing, I want to keep playing at least for 2-3 games. But I do think that with that being said, they made the most of the early bye. You know what I mean? Like, because you could have said, okay, bye week, 3 or 4, but at some point in time, you're going to be like, okay, now you're going to have 2 quick buys in a row, or you're going to have a bye too late. So I think those are a couple observations I have. I don't love the week 2 bye, but I actually think Notre Dame did a nice job around it because you are going to have 2 really tough games to start the season, right? Like you nailed it. Like the start to this season is going to be really tough. I mean, Purdue is probably not going to be much better this year. I mean, with all due respect to Barry Odom, that's a big turnaround he's got to make, and a lot of his best players hit the portal. That's a complete rebuild he has in front of him. But the rest of it, I mean, those are all potentially good football teams. They're all bowl teams. How much better is A&M going to be? I don't know if Miami's going to be better next year than they were this year. I don't know if they're going to be slightly worse. It won't be much. They're not going to be as good at quarterback. I don't think Carson Beck's as good as Cam Ward, but I think they might be better in a couple other areas. You're going into year 3 or 4 of a coach's tenure, that type of stuff. Year 4, year 4 of Mario Cristobal's tenure. But then you get that bye week in between, and then you got that tough game against A&M. So you're going to have a first-time starter against Miami. He gets to kind of go through that experience, and then you get an extra week to prep to overcome those type of things. And then you're home for 2 weeks. Then you're at Arkansas. Then you got Boise, NC State, and USC, and then you get that bye. So even though I don't love it, I do think the layout of it is pretty good. The only back-to-back, like brutal back-to-back games is got a bye in between of them. I mean, that might be the 2 best teams are going to play next year. Now, maybe Boise's still as good as they were this year. Maybe USC takes a big jump. Maybe Syracuse can build on their 10-win season. They were very good last year. I mean, there's a lot of maybe what ifs, Arkansas, whatever. But what we know now, I think you could make a case that the two best teams are going to play next year are your first two games. And so they've put a bye in between it. I like that, and I like the fact that there's no back-to-back road games. I absolutely love the fact there's no back-to-back road games. I mean, selfishly, that's good for me, but I'm more referring to for Notre Dame. And I think the November travel schedule with two of those games being shorter trips. I mean, Boston's not an easy trip, but it's not a crazy trip either. It's a straight shot across. And then Pitt's a real easy road trip as well. I think the schedule's laid out pretty nicely. Senior Day will be against Syracuse this year. That's the other thing. It's the second time in 4 years they will have Senior Day against Syracuse. 2021 Senior Day was against Syracuse as well.
I'm going to be interested to see which team, because odds are more likely than not there's going to be a team in the back half of their schedule that is better than what they were expected to be at the start of the year. Right now, and there's a lot of work that I need to do and take a look at who's returning and who's coming back. Again, that's more stuff to get into as the postseason goes on, because who knows who
It's going to be fun though, right?
Oh, I mean, it's going to, yeah.
Like you look at Pitt and you're like, they were 7-6, but like go look at what Pitt was before Eli Holstein got banged up.
Mm-hmm.
They were a different team before he got banged up. What will Bill O'Brien do in year two?
Right.
Can Trey Taylor finally get Stanford turned around? I mean, there's going to be a lot of fun storylines for us to explore during this offseason, Trevor. When you could, to your point, when we look at these teams, like there's a lot of, I'm not sure about that team.
Right.
Like they could go one way or the other. And that's the nature of this portal era, Trevor, is there's a lot more fluctuation amongst teams from year to year. A team that you don't think is going to be very good has a great portal offseason, and then boom, they're a much better team, or vice versa.
Yeah. Yep. It's going to be interesting to dive into. But sticking on the topic of, the front part of their schedule being what it is, right? You have first game one down in Miami. You have the bye week. And then in whoever it is, whether it's Angeli, Minchie, or Carr, their first start at home is coming against Mike Elko in year two against an SEC team at Texas A&M, who I'm sure that they remember the double-digit loss that they had at home to open the season in 2024. So it kind of begs the question, like, is a front-loaded schedule in the 12-team playoff era, is it better? Is it impartial? When you take a look at Notre Dame's schedule here, Bryan, what are some of your thoughts on that?
It's funny, Trev, my opinion on scheduling has changed a little bit in this 12-team playoff era. And part of it is because of what happened this year. I mean, Notre Dame had that early loss to a okay Northern Illinois team, but not one that has any business beating Notre Dame. And they went on a run, and by the end of the year, there was enough happened that they got into the 12-team playoff. And we thought that you and I thought they were going to still get in. It was just the chance of getting in, as long as they won out, we thought they were going to get in. Now, at that time, the question about whether they could win out was a legitimate question, but we felt that they're not out of the playoff. They've got to run the table. They'll still be in, but you're probably looking at like a 9, 10, 11 seed, something like that, where you're going to be on the road. And then obviously things played out in a way where Notre Dame got a home game. But, you look at it and say, you've got to, you go 1-1 against those two teams. Minimum, that's a start where it's like, okay, well, you were 1-1 last year with a road win over A&M and a home loss to Northern Illinois. What's going to look better on the resume, that or a road loss to Miami and a home win over A&M, or vice versa? And so now you're already kind of ahead of the 8 ball. In the past, I was kind of like, I like a strong opponent in week 1, and then I like a little bit of fluff in between, and then maybe week 4 or 5 you start then ramping up again. And I kind of liked having a couple really tough opponents in November. I felt like that was how you kind of built momentum and how you built your resume and all that kind of stuff. And I've changed my opinion on that a little bit. I still think you need at least one tough game in November. But now it's like, when you think about it, starting November 1st, so like coming out of the bye week, Notre Dame will have played 7 games. If the season goes how we hope it's going to go, they're still going to have 9 games left. And the games in the last 4 are going to be brutal. And so now I don't love the idea of having a really tough November because you don't get a whole lot of time off before that in your first round playoff game since Notre Dame doesn't get a bye. So as long as you get some competition in November, but not like brutal, like, man, every game is a dogfight, man. It's just a battle. It's like you're going down to the wire and it's physical. And there are some teams that could potentially be physical. But as long as it's not that, I kind of like, because there's going to be, Syracuse, Fran Brown's not going anywhere. Pat Narduzzi's team is going to be quality. I think last year was a bit of a, last year as in 2023, wasn't an anomaly season for them. The 3-9, just kind of everything went wrong. I think this past year was more in line with what to expect from Pitt, consistently 7 to 8 win team. Every now and then they'll have that really good senior laden team. BC is going to be, I think Bill O'Brien did a much better job this year than I thought he was going to do at BC. I didn't think he had the roster to be a bowl team, and they were not only a bowl team, they were a couple plays here and there in other games. They blew a big lead against Louisville, and had a shot to win that game. So there's some quality games, but there's not like, 05 USC or 06 USC on the road.
Right.
2011 Stanford on the road, where you're just last 3-4 games, you're just playing a gauntlet of a schedule. And then you're so dang tired that extra time in between your first round playoff game just doesn't give you enough time to recover. And that's kind of where I look at it. So I used to think, give me softer up front to get my team going and then tougher later. I've kind of changed that a little bit in the new era of the 12-team playoff.
Well, it makes sense too, right? Because to your point, instead of just having to win 2 games or back in the BCS era, like 1 game to reach the national championship stage or win the national championship, you now have to play, especially Notre Dame's case, you have to play 3 games just to make it there, right? Which is something that we saw this past season. So, for me, when I go through and I look at it, I would rather have, if there's going to be a potential for a loss. Now, if there's anything that 2024 showed us, anybody can beat you on any given weekend if you don't prepare mentally and physically the right way. And that's not just specific to Notre Dame.
Thank you. Yeah.
Like that isn't, right? You're not going to tell me that teams like Alabama expected to go down to Norman and lose to that team by 20.
Ohio State against Michigan.
Right. So, and when you go and you look at the schedule, because that's some of the comps that I've seen. Well, Ohio State was able to lose in the last week of the regular season, so host a home playoff game. It's like, that is correct. However, they had a 1-point road loss to the number 1 team in the country by 1 point. They beat a ranked top 5 Penn State team in Happy Valley, and they beat a top 5 team in Indiana at home. As of right now, you look at Notre Dame's schedule, and they're not going to have that. They might, but I don't know if I look at the schedule, there's going to be more research that I have to do and dive into it. I don't see a 2024 IU on this schedule. Now, mind you, I don't think Ohio State was looking at their schedule after the 2023 season and thought IU was going to do what they were going to do either. But for me, long story short, I would rather have the potential for a loss being early, because there's more of a, new defensive coordinator, new starting quarterback, all of this list of things. It's like, okay, that's something that the committee or even us as fans might be able to sympathize with in week 1 or 2. But it's hard to say, well, they have a first-year starting quarterback. It's like, well, he's played 9 games. So, you know what I mean? At some point, the rhythm has to start gelling. So I do think in this playoff era, it is more beneficial to have your tougher games kind of front-loaded. Because on the flip side of that coin, the other tough teams, like the really big-name programs like a Miami, like a Texas A&M, they're not at their peak either, right? And so it's more of an even playing field, I guess, if that makes sense. So some of the issues that Notre Dame is going to be having, it's going to be some of the same that Miami and Texas A&M have as well.
And if you're going to play a tougher opponent in November, have it be at home. And I think that's also true. As I looking at the schedule now, I think the 2 toughest teams in the final 5 games are Syracuse and Navy. Based off what they were last year and the projecting, you could maybe throw Pitt in there. You and I felt during the season that Pitt was strong start. It was a little smoke and mirrors. They were good, but they weren't as good as they looked early, and they weren't as bad as they looked late. They just weren't. But I think, based on what we know of these teams, Navy and Syracuse are the 2 best teams that are going to play next year in November. And you get them at home. I would much rather play Miami week 1 than Miami in week 12 or game 12, where you've got to now after you've had 10, 11 games under your belt. You now have, like Notre Dame did in 1989. You play that brutal schedule during the regular season, just a grueling schedule that Notre Dame had to play. I've talked about this before. Notre Dame played they beat 7 top 15 teams that year. Excuse me, 7 top 20 teams last year. You had to play Virginia in the opener. Virginia finished the year ranked 18th in the coaches poll. You played number 2 Michigan on the road in week 2. Michigan finished number 7. You played Michigan State that next week. Michigan State finished ranked 16th. Purdue and Stanford weren't very good back then. And then you have to go on the road and you have to play at Air Force, who was a pretty good team back then. Finished that year 8-4-1 under Fisher DeBerry. Then you got to play number 9 USC the next week. USC finished that year ranked 8th. Then you've got to play Pitt the next week, who at the time was ranked 7th. They finished the year ranked 17th. And like the schedule was just brutal. You have to play at Penn State, and they finished the year 15th. And then after all that, you've got to go down on November 25th after Thanksgiving and play Miami at Miami, right? Like that's just kind of like, you want to get that game at home late in the year. So I would much rather have a game like that early than play a game like that late. And if you do play a really good team late, and I think that Syracuse, Navy, Pitt are the 3 best options to be really good next year, I would probably put Syracuse and Navy at the top of that list. They're both at home. And that's my thing is like, who knows how that 89 season turns out if Notre Dame, is playing at home against Miami instead of on the road. If they'd have flipped the 88 and 89 schedules, maybe Notre Dame doesn't win it in 88, but they would have won it in 89, that kind of thing. So that part of it I like, Trev. And it's challenging enough to where there's no national title contenders on the schedule. I don't think any of those teams are going to be preseason top 10. Miami, might have the best shot because of the Carson Beck transfer, whether you agree with it or not. That may give them the perception to be a top 10 team. They'll be ranked in the top 25. A&M will probably be ranked in the top 25 by that point in time. So you're going to have, I think Boise might have a shot if they keep winning, if they show that they're able to win without Ashton, could get ranked. NC State, who knows what they're going to be, man. Like Dave Doran's one of those weird coaches that if they're ranked low next year in the ACC, they're going to concern me. But if they're ranked high, they're going to fall off. That's his MO. USC, what are they going to be? We don't know. But so we don't know if there's any like legit title contenders, but there's a lot of good teams on the schedule. And that's, I think, good for Notre Dame because, again, you're not fighting for a bye. You just need to worry about getting in. And I think this is a schedule that, depending on who you lose to and when, this is a year where 10-2 probably still gets you in the playoff, in my opinion. It just may not get you a home game. So I like how it's built. And that's why I say if you can just get through that first 2-game schedule at no worse than 1-1, you got a pretty good shot at being no worse than 10-2 based on what we know of the team now. But again, there's a lot we're going to have to learn about teams. So overall, Trev, I like the makeup of the schedule. I don't love it because, again, your first 2 games with a new quarterback are against really tough teams. If Notre Dame had a returning starter coming back at quarterback, I'd love the way it's laid out. I'm like, look, you're fresh. You got your veteran. You guys are going to be rolling early. Go knock those teams off early, and then you're rolling after that. It's just the circumstance of this team with new starters at quarterback and a new defensive coordinator and that type of thing. It's a little bit more nerve-wracking-ish, I guess is the way to say it, that they're going to start off the way that they did. They are.
It adds a little bit to the unknown. That's already some of the unknown of Notre Dame's offseason so far. But listen, guys, we're going to have a lot more coming out about Notre Dame's 2025 schedule. Like we said, there's a lot more that we have to figure out about these teams that have been listed on the schedule. And there's still some things that we have to find out about Notre Dame, right? Who's the defensive coordinator going to be? What's his quarterback battle going to start looking like? Who are going to be some of the replacements that step up to replace guys like Xavier Watson, Riley Mills, and right? So there's going to be a lot. But we still have a lot more we got to cover on today's show, right? We're gonna take a look back in 2024. We're going to talk about expectations for 2025. So there's a lot that we have to get into. And then, of course, we are going to finish up with a mailbag. So if you guys want to post your questions in the chat, start throwing them in there. We'll have them all start, and we'll know which ones to get to once we reach the end.
And FYI, Trevor, I'll see your 2024 Georgia schedule, and I'll raise you Notre Dame 1989. Just saying.
Hey, man.
Just saying. Right? That was a monster. And I didn't even get to the fact they had to play number 1 Colorado in the Orange Bowl. Beat them, by the way. That was a gauntlet of a schedule that year, man. Absolute gauntlet of a schedule.
Whenever you read it off, it's just like it's
nuts.
I mean,
they played the best team in the ACC who ranked in the top 25. They played the Big 12 winner who ranked number 4. They played the Big 10 champ who ranked number 7. They also played the number 16 team in the country in the Big 10. They beat the Pac-12 champs that year who finished number 8. You're just like, good Lord. Then they also had to play and lost to the number 1 team in the country, who's an independent team. Like, that was they literally beat the champ of every Power 4 league except, what would it be? Like, what did I say? Like the Big 12? No, they did. Big 8, Colorado. Yeah. They beat ACC, Big 10. They didn't play the SEC champ, Arkansas. Okay. Whoop-de-doo.
Good Lord.
Yeah. That's a freaking crazy schedule.
That is definition of a gauntlet.
And the SEC wasn't quite the SEC back then. So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that was a crazy schedule. Crazy schedule.
Well, look, guys, before we move on to the next part here, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and share this podcast with your friends and family. Whichever platform you guys watch us on, be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it. And, of course, the best way to support what we do here at Irish Breakdown is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com.